before we get started looking at the Kent State shooting, does anybody have any questions or thoughts about anything in the news? Anything they've seen? Any questions? Or any historical, anything at all?
Snow never stop.
I know. I didn't even I got 4 inches of snow last night. I
Oh
didn't
my
even know it was
God.
coming.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Never stop. Just keep coming and coming.
Yeah,
Oh God.
I know. I think it was last year. Um, I always keep track of in my Google online calendar. I keep my calendar, and I always put a note of when when my kids like have
Mhm.
a snow day in school. I think it was last year they didn't miss any school. Um,
Mhm.
maybe it was the year before, but I think it was last year. And now we're like, my kids had a 2 hour delay today.
Mhm.
We're getting a lot of snow this year, I think.
Yes.
Or it
Yes.
seems, I don't know. It seems like it. Probably
Yeah.
always seems
Yeah,
like
It
it.
is.
we're getting more
Yeah.
snow than we did last year. Last
Yeah.
year, often every day we got like a little bit of snow, but often we got like less snow than we are this year. Last year, every day was like 40 something, 50 something degrees in winter.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, really?
Yeah. That's, these weather cycles and climate cycles. See, every year is different, but yeah, it does seem, I mean, it's not terrible. Although I was talking with somebody, one of my coworkers in Philadelphia, and she said over the weekend, I think, there was a real wet snow, and it was like melting when it hit the ground, but on the roads it was sticking a little bit, and it just turned to slush,
Yes. Mhm.
and then the slush turned to ice. So now
Oh
there's just
no.
like mountains of treacherous ice everywhere. Yeah, that's a Pennsylvania winter for you. Yeah. Um, any any other thoughts before we get started?
Mm.
Okay. Well, has anybody ever heard of the Kent State protests shootings before?
No, I don't
Jediah
know.
Olawakimi, have you ever heard this?
Um, I'm sorry.
Have you ever heard of this topic before, the Kent State shootings?
No, I've not heard
Listen,
about it
I'm
before.
I'm I'm listen. I'm just listen, I'm just very, very sorry. This is the first time I'm hearing about this. I have not been. I was trying to get into social studies when I was younger, but I didn't get into much. I was just focusing on math and reading and writing. That's all
Hmm.
when I was younger, not into social studies and science. So I'm very, very sorry, sir. Um, this is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Oh no, that's okay. No, that's okay. No, that's why we're looking at it. But it is, um, I think even kids, especially in school and stuff, like my kids in school, my kids are in sixth, eighth, and 10th grade, and we don't in school we don't really cover the more modern history. Now this is of course 50 years ago, 1970. um, but like that modern, most school students in social studies class, history class, don't get past World War II, if that really. I mean, everybody always talks about the founding fathers and the constitutional, the revolutionary era, which we've talked about too. And then you'll talk about the Civil War. Everybody always, every teacher loves to teach the Civil War. Maybe World War II and up through there. But after that, it kind of disappears. Maybe sometimes people touch on civil rights, you know, with Martin Luther King Jr. Day or something. But um, the Vietnam War is rarely taught in schools, even high school. Quite often, it's not touched on. Um, and then, of course, anything more modern than that is we don't consider. I don't know. We don't think of it as history because it is more modern. Although this is again, we're talking 50 years ago. Um, so yeah, if you've never heard of it, it's no problem at all. That's why we're going to talk about it today. But let's think. So to set the stage, this is during the Vietnam War. Okay, let's look. Let's find a map of. Vietnam. Okay, that's Ohio. Okay, so Vietnam. The Vietnam War is in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Okay, here's Vietnam. Okay, what do we call that? Southeast Asia. Here's Asia, right?
Mhm.
India, China. Vietnam is this kind of a skinny country on the coast of Southeast Asia. The Cold War we've talked about, right? We talked about it when we talked about the Joe McCarthy hearings, right? How he accused everybody around of being, he was a senator, and he accused everybody of being a communist. So we touched on the Cold War there. The Cold War isn't, of course, a war. It's just a time period of increased tension, mainly between us and Russia, right? The United States and Russia. Or the United States being capitalist and Russia being communist. It was a battle, not an actual battle, but an intellectual battle between capitalism and communism. Part of the Cold War era was a couple of actual wars that took place. One was the Korean War, which is up here in Asia. North Korea, it's how we now have North Korea, South Korea. That is from the Korean War in the 1950s. You also have the Vietnam War, where at the time it was between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Now that's a unified Vietnam. Those two are what we call proxy wars. Does anybody know what a proxy is? Proxy, proxy.
I heard of that word, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's a good word. It's like a representative. Like if I can't go to a
Representative. Okay.
yeah, representative. Yeah. Okay. So if I can't go to a meeting, if I have a meeting, at work and I can't go, but I send a proxy, I send somebody to go on my behalf. Maybe they take notes and somebody who has the same views as me, and they're going to do my job at this meeting. Okay. A proxy, a representative.
Proxy. 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 I think mean representative. I think I remember that word because we watched this Bugs Bunny DVD tape. You know Bugs
Okay.
Bunny. Are you familiar with Bugs Bunny?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Bugs
Well,
Bunny.
well,
Okay.
listen. Bugs Bunny tape. It was episode Proxy Foxy. In other words, I want to say that means proxy, and proxy Foxy, representative Foxy, trying to be a fox.
Yeah, so it would be interesting. And sometimes it can be a legal term, right? So somebody who legally represents you, maybe at a meeting or a negotiation or something, I don't know. So a proxy, these are proxy wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
They're proxy wars. So there's, let's say, Korea, okay, the Korean War in 1950s. South Korea, we backed the South Koreans. And Russia and China, China was also communist at the time, they backed the North Koreans. They supported the North Koreans. So it was like the US fighting Russia through these proxy nations. We were fighting through kind of supporting the South Koreans, and the Russians and communists were fighting through supporting the North Koreans. So these are what historians call proxy wars. Okay, it's not really American soldiers shooting at Russian soldiers, but it is indirectly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so these are proxy wars. The Cold War, I lost it. The Cold War is not an active war between us and Russia, but there were these proxy wars, which were actual wars going on. Okay, so the Vietnam War is through the 60s and 70s, and there's a lot of history going on, and the overall history is that really it's complicated. It was not popular in the United States because there was a lot of winning and losing and gaining ground and losing ground, and American troops were dying. and it was in the news every night. You know, the new number of American troops that died that day or that week. So the Vietnam War in the United States with American people was not popular. There were several presidents throughout the war, and some of them made mistakes, and you know, it was messy, it was confusing, it was complex, and it was unpopular. So we're going to do this reading. Now I'm somehow zoomed way in here. Let's get back. So we're going to do this reading. So that's our background. This happens during the Vietnam War. There's protests during the Vietnam War, protests of the Vietnam War. So let's just preview this, okay? Kent State shooting. Kent State is a, uh, a university in Ohio. I actually have a map of that up. Let's grab that. Okay, so here's Pennsylvania, right? Here's Ohio. Kent State is in Northeast Ohio. And it's a kind of a mid-size, I think it's a state university. And you know, it's not too far from Pennsylvania. You know, I don't know if I've ever been there. I ran track in college, and I think I have gone to Kent State. You know, it's just kind of just a regular college campus. So let's preview this reading. I always like to read the subtitles or headings and just see where I'm going. Okay, so background information. Here's a newspaper clipping that I cut and paste in here, and it says 4 dead, 10 hurt at KSU. So obviously, people, there's going to be some death. We're gonna read about. The Vietnam War, invasion of Cambodia, which is right next to, maybe you saw it on my map. We'll take another look. It's right next to Vietnam. Okay, so invasion of Cambodia, Vietnam War protests, Ohio National Guard arrives. So the Ohio National Guard comes to Kent State campus to stop the protest or protect against the protest or something. So we'll talk about that. Protesters and guardsmen gather. 4 dead in Ohio. Aftermath of the Kent State shooting. Okay, kind of long, so we probably ought to get a move on here. So ask questions as we go. Let me know if you have any questions, and we can just learn as we go. We'll take turns. Let me get us started here. So background information. 4 Kent State University students were killed and 9 were injured on May 4th, 1970, when members of the Ohio National Guard opened fire on a crowd gathered to protest the Vietnam War. Okay, well, that's a pretty good summary right there. The tragedy was a watershed moment for a nation divided by the conflict in Southeast Asia. In its immediate aftermath, a student-led strike forced the temporary closure of colleges and universities across the country. Some political observers believe the events of that day in Northeast Ohio tilted public opinion against the war and may have contributed to the downfall of President Richard Nixon. Okay, so that's an introduction. Generally speaking, that first paragraph, we can see from the style, we can guess from the style, that this is probably a summary of everything we're going to read, right? It certainly summarizes the events, and then it kind of clues us into where this article is going to take us, the conclusions this article is going to make. It tilted public opinion against the war, may have contributed to the downfall of President Richard Nixon. Okay. Olawakimi, could you read paragraphs, let's say paragraphs 2 and 3?
Okay. The Vietnam War. America, give me a few minutes. I want to move away from the background noise. Yeah.
Okay.
The Vietnam War. American involvement in the civil war in Vietnam, which pitted the communists of the northern parts of the country against the more democratic south. had been controversial from its beginnings, and a significant segment of the general public in the United States was against the presence of US Army forces in the region. Do you say I should read 3 too?
Yeah, please.
Protests across the country in the latter half of the 1960s were part of organized opposition against US military activities in Southeast Asia, as well as the military draft. In fact, President Richard M. Nixon had been elected in 1968, due in large part to his promise to end the Vietnam War. And until April 1970, it appeared he was on the way to fulfilling that campaign promise, as military operations were seemingly winding down.
Okay, so that's important. We got to follow the story here. And it says Richard Nixon was elected in 1968, due in large part to his promise to end the Vietnam War. And until April 1970, it seemed like that was happening as military operations were seemingly winding down. Now, it mentions people protesting U.S. military activities there, as well as protesting the military draft. What is the draft?
Draft.
Yeah, what is the military draft in the United States?
A group of militaries, yes?
No, good guess, but no.
Okay.
Drafts can be like, what's it called? Like a sketch. Am I correct?
Say it again, like a what?
A sketch. Not really the entire something, but like a sketch of what is happening. Maybe parts of the military groups or something like that.
Oh, I see. No, not yet. Well, that's a good guess. If I write a draft of a paper, you're right, it can be like a sketch, but it's a different kind of draft. Good guess, but
Okay.
no. Okay, so a military draft, well, I remember when I turned 18 a long time ago, I had to sign up for the draft. I think young men and women do today as well. The draft is, well, okay, so I don't really know how it works today. Back then, they did a military draft. Okay. America is at war with Vietnam. We need soldiers in the military branches. But let's say there's not enough people volunteering. We have a volunteer military in the United States. We don't require people to enter the, the military. It's all volunteer. However, at the time, in emergency situations, they did a military draft. And I remember one time my dad telling me that it was by birthday. So they need, let's say they need 100,000 more soldiers in the military. They would choose at random, they would do a lottery, and I think it was televised, to be fair. They did a lottery, and they would choose birthdays, dates, May 5th, August 25th. And if you were born on that day, you had to enter the military. Okay. Now you can be exempt if you're not physically fit, or let's say you're a single mother or a single father, and your children would be harmed by you going into the military. You can be exempted sometimes. But by and large, they did a lottery, and during the Vietnam War, they did a draft. And if they picked your birthday, you had to enter the military. Now, you can imagine how popular that would be today, right? Not at all popular. And it was about that popular back then. It was, especially because it was a war out there in the world, in Asia. We weren't even fighting anybody. It wasn't to protect the United States. It was us supporting the South Vietnamese. And it just felt like a thing that we shouldn't really be involved in. So people protested. They thought we shouldn't be there. They thought that the military draft was a bad idea, was wrong. It should be illegal, So that's a military draft. At the time, I think it was only young men. It wasn't young women, but there was a draft going on. Now I don't know the history exactly when the draft started. This is, now we're talking April 1970, May 1970. I don't know how long it had been going, but people didn't like it, right? Imagine being a mother and your son just at random gets his birthday picked and he has to go off to fight over in Asia, right? You wouldn't be a big fan of that possibility. Um, Ruby, do you want to read paragraph 4?
Okay, I'm going to try. Inventions of Colombia. However, on April 30th, 1970s, President Nixon authorized U.S. troops to
Invade.
invade Colombia.
That's
Uh,
Cambodia.
Cambodia, a natural nation located west of Vietnam. North Vietnamese troops were signed as using safe havens
Havens.
heavens in Cambodia to launch attacks on the US. Backed South Vietnamese and parts of the Ho Chi Minh
Trail.
Trail. A supply routine used by the North Vietnamese passed through Cambodia.
Okay, thank you. So let's look at a better map. Although that's President Nixon,
Mm-hmm.
I think making a TV speech.
Okay.
Let's look at Cambodia. Okay, so here's Vietnam, and here's Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in Korea, the North was the communists, and we were supporting the South, the traditionally democratic or trying to be democratic South Vietnam. Now you see Ho Chi Minh City. I don't know where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, but that's like I think it was a highway, but it was a supply route that uh, the North Vietnamese used to supply their troops. And part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail went through Cambodia. Also, the North Vietnamese, our enemies in the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese were hiding, were setting up, quotes, as Ruby said, safe havens, right? Safe places in Cambodia. So Cambodia is a neutral country. They're not involved in the war, and yet North Vietnamese are sneaking in, staying there, and using Cambodia, like hiding in Cambodia because it's a neutral country, not taking a part in the war, and using Cambodia to attack U.S. backed South Vietnamese. So President Nixon authorizes U.S. troops to invade Cambodia. Okay. So this is the reason we're talking about it, is because that's going to be a trigger here for more protests. So it says, controversially, the president made his decision without notifying his Secretary of State William Rogers or Defense Secretary Melvin Laird. So he didn't consult his two pretty big important people in his cabinet. They, along with the rest of the American public, found out about the invasion when President Nixon addressed the nation on television 2 days later. So American troops invade Cambodia. Nobody knows about it. The president doesn't tell anybody that he's made this decision with American forces until he's on television 2 days later. Members of Congress accused the president of illegally widening the scope of U.S. involvement in the war by not receiving their consent through a vote. the Constitution gives Congress only, like the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. Sometimes presidents, as the president is the commander in chief of the armed forces, presidents can go ahead and do stuff, but they shouldn't do too much, right? They shouldn't get in too deep into military conflicts without Congress declaring war.
Mm.
It says, however, it was public reaction to the decision that ultimately led to the events at Kent State University, a public university in Northeast Ohio.
Hmm.
Jendai, could you read paragraph 7?
Even before, okay, am I all right? Even before, okay, here we go. Well, now, even before Nixon's formal announcement of the invasion, rumors of the military incursion into Cambodia resulted in protests at colleges and universities across the country. At Kent State, these protests actually began on May the 1st, the day after the invasion. That day, hundreds of students gathered on the Commons, a park-like space at the center of the campus that had been the site of large demonstrations and other events in the past. Several speakers spoke out against the war in general and President Nixon's um, spe- specifically. Specifically, I'm sorry.
Specifically, that's okay. Okay, so protests start. Protests at Kent State start actually on May 1st, the day after the invasion. Now, I highlighted the word incursion there. The U.S. rumors of the U.S. military incursion into Cambodia. An incursion. What's another way to put that? Just like military activity, a military invasion. When the military goes into a place, it's an incursion. Okay, just kind of an interesting word. All right, Jendai, read paragraph 8 as well. There.
That night in downtown Kent, they okay. There were there were reports of violent clashes between students and local police. Police
Alleged.
alleged. I gotta read it. Police alleged that their cars were hit with bottles, and that students stopped traffic and in bonfires in the streets.
Okay.
Reinforcements were called in from neighboring communities, and Kent Mayor Laurie Satcham declared a state of emergency. Before ordering all the bars in the town closed, Satcham also contacted Ohio Governor James Rhodes seeking assistance. Satcham's decision to close the bars actually angered the protesters more and increased the size of the crowds on the streets of town. Police were eventually able to move the protesters back towards campus, using tear gas to disperse the crowd. However, the stage was set for trouble.
Okay, thank you. So that's a Friday night. Friday, May 1st. In not on campus at the university, but in downtown, in the streets of downtown Kent, the city of Kent, Ohio. Police alleged that their cars were hit with bottles. Students stopped traffic and lit bonfires in the streets. It's just a big crowd of college kids and young people protesting, and it sounds like causing general trouble. Just protesting, and we've seen protests this, last year. This is now not unfamiliar to us. Disruption. Okay, whether it's good or bad, for good reasons or bad reasons, it is disruption. Okay, they're stopping traffic, lighting bonfires in the streets. I mean, you're definitely breaking the law when you throw things at the police. That's, I wouldn't say good, but the city of Kent mayor declares a state of emergency, orders the bars to be closed. Well, on a Friday night in a college town, when you close the bars and everybody gets kicked out, they're probably not going to go home and watch a movie and fall asleep. They're probably already drunk or half drunk. And now they're angry that they got kicked out of a bar, and they walk out of the bar because they were kicked out, and they see a protest going on. So they're going to jump in, right? So now you've got a real situation on your hands. So it says the police were able to disperse the crowds using tear gas, move the protesters back towards campus. But obviously, there's something's happening. Okay. Ohio National Guard arrives. Now let's talk about the National Guard. The National Guard is a branch of the military. What is the National Guard? How is it different than the Army?
National, I just want to guess, National Guard, they are go all over the world, yes, no?
No, that they're not all over the world. They're just within the United States.
Oh, okay.
Let me say this: the Army, it's not. I don't think it's in the Constitution, but somewhere it's a law, it's a rule that the United States military is not allowed to take on police action within the United States.
Okay.
So, like, let's say the big protests across the country in last summer, and then you have the big protest, riot, insurrection at the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Let's say January 6th, right? If you saw the news, like those Capitol police officers at the Capitol building were overwhelmed. They called for reinforcements. It would be great if if the Army could just drive in and scare the crap out of all the protesters and they'd run away, right? But that's not the job of the military. Who they could call, and interestingly, it took 2 hours for the National Guard to come. Who they could call was the National Guard. The National Guard is a branch, I think it's considered a branch of the military. And they don't go overseas to fight. Okay. The National Guard are people who are citizens that basically are on standby.
Oh, like a team SWAT, yes, no?
Well, like a SWAT team, but like a National Guard, be like me. I'm a teacher and I do adult education, but if I get the phone call that the Pennsylvania National Guard is being activated or deployed somewhere within Pennsylvania, I would drop what I'm doing. I'd grab my gear and I'd drive to wherever I need to go.
Oh, okay.
So these aren't full-time soldiers. They're people, just regular people who are part of the National Guard. The National Guard isn't always active. They can be activated. And it's actually the governor's job. Only the governor of Pennsylvania can activate the Pennsylvania National Guard. Every state has their own Pennsylvania National Guard, Ohio National Guard.
Okay.
Right? So, as we're going to see, they're soldiers, but they're not like full-time Army soldiers. Okay? The National Guard is called up sometimes to keep the peace, or sometimes like down south if there's a hurricane.
Oh, like emergency, right? Yes, no?
Emergency. It's an emergency. Only in emergencies are you ever going to hear about the National Guard.
Okay.
Possibly a big protest. Maybe they need to get things peaceful. They need to protect something or somebody. if there's like if there's a threat of a terrorist attack that's coming, the National
Okay.
Guard will go to that place and just be there and be ready and keep the peace and keep people safe. Or
Oh.
like down south, if there's a hurricane, the National Guard will come. Now,
Mhm.
they're not there to shoot anybody, but
Right.
they'll help clean up, or
Okay.
deliver food, or save people in a flood or something like that. So the
Mhm.
National Guard is just a force of very able, very talented,
Mhm.
trained citizens,
Oh,
but not full-time soldiers. People that the
okay.
governor of a state can activate, call up, and say, "Hey, I need," and it's there's generals and things just like in the army, and they say, "I need people to do this. I need people to do that." Right. So the it says that the mayor calls
Mhm.
up the Ohio governor
Mhm.
and says, "I need National Guard, right?
Mhm.
Give me a
Mhm.
thousand troops. We're going to see, I don't know how many,
Right.
um, to keep the peace. I have a big problem. I got a huge protest going on. There's
Mhm.
riots. I need help, right? My town's police force isn't capable of handling this job. So I need,
Mhm.
however many National Guard troops." So that's
Mhm.
what we're going to see. Okay. So paragraph 10. It says the following day, Saturday, May 2nd, there were rumors that radicals were making threats against the town of Kent and the university. The threats reportedly were primarily made against businesses in the town and certain buildings on campus. After speaking with other city officials, Satram, the mayor, asked Governor Rhodes to send the Ohio National Guard to Kent in an attempt to calm tensions in the area. So radicals, people, when we say somebody's a radical, it means that their views are way outside of the normal views that everybody has.
Mhm.
So I guess, without knowing all the details here, radicals, people with extreme views, maybe we're
Okay.
calling in bomb threats or saying we are going to bomb or we're going to attack
Mhm.
businesses and certain buildings on campus. So just a threat of violence.
Okay.
Um, And so the mayor asks the governor to send some Ohio National Guard troops.
Mhm.
Olubakimi, could you read paragraph? Could you read 11 and 12 for us?
Who?
Okay.
Yeah, Olubakimi.
At the time, at the time, members of the National Guard were already on duty in the region and thus were mobilized fairly quickly. By the time they arrived at the Kent State campus on the night of May 2nd, however, protesters had already set fire to the school's ROTC building, and scores were watching and cheering as it burned. Some protesters also reportedly clashed with firefighters, attempting to put out the blaze. And guards men were asked to intervene. Clashes between the guard and the protester continued well into the night, and dozens of arrests were made. Interestingly, the next day, Sunday, May 3rd, was a fairly calm day on campus. The weather was sunny and warm, and students were logging on the commons and even engaging with the guardsmen on duty. Still, with nearly 1,000 national guards at the school, the scene was more like that of a war zone than a college campus.
Okay,
Mm.
thank you. So you have hundreds or thousands of college kids doing this protest. Also, you know, I'm not in college anymore. I can go on to a college campus, right? So you have other people from the community, not just college kids were protesting. You have other people, and sometimes those other people, aren't
Mhm.
aren't safe. So what happens is there's protesting on campus, and they burn the ROTC building. Now ROTC, I forget
Hello.
what it stands for. I think it's Reserved Officer Training Corps. ROTC is a program in some high schools and lots of colleges where you can participate in ROTC, and it's like it's a training corps. You receive training that when you then graduate college with your degree in whatever, um, you're into the military. But you're not just signing up for the military like any regular person. You will be trained and ready to be an officer, right? A captain or a lieutenant or a general, right? You're not going to make a general right away, but you'll be trained and prepared to enter the military, not just as a regular soldier, but as an officer.
Mm.
So lots of colleges, even today, have ROTC programs. It's a good way to get, smart, capable people going to college, also training to serve in the military. Okay,
Mhm.
sounds good. Well, obviously, at a time during the Civil, or not the Civil War, during the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
people are already protesting the war. They're protesting the draft. People are upset, and
Mhm.
so they burned on, the day and the night of May 2nd. They burned. Here's a picture. They burned the ROTC building. Where the students would gather, take
Mhm.
a class or two about military training as part of their college education. So they burned the ROTC building down. That's kind of like attacking the military, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Burning a kind of a military building, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Um, Firefighters were attempting to put it out, and protesters were stopping the firefighters from putting out the fire.
Oh no.
Then you have National Guardsmen stopping the protesters who were fighting the firefighters
Mm.
fighting the fire. So it just becomes, I mean, it's a very scary, it must have been a very scary situation.
It was chaos.
Yeah, it was chaos, exactly. Okay. And so they watched, essentially they stood by and watched this building burn.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, it says, interestingly, the next day, May 3rd, Sunday, May 3rd, was a fairly calm day on campus. Kids, it was sunny and warm, lounging on the commons, the grassy areas in campus, even engaging with the National Guardsmen on duty. There's still 1,000 National Guards at the school. Okay.
Mhm.
So the scene was more like that of a war zone than a college campus. Next
Mhm.
day, Monday, May 4th, that's the date at the top of this article. This is the date when 4 people will die. So this is what we're going to see now.
Mm.
Okay. Um, Jendai, could you read paragraph 13?
Okay, here we go. With a major protest already scheduled for noon on Monday, May 4th, once again on the Commons, university officials attempted to defuse the situation by prohibiting the event. Still, crowds began to gather at about 11 o'clock that morning, and an estimated 3,000 protests and speculators were there by the scheduled start time.
Go ahead and read 14 too there.
Stationed at the now destroyed ROTC building were rough 100 Ohio National Guardsmen carrying M1 military rifles.
Okay. So here's what we have. There's a protest planned for Monday afternoon.
Mhm.
University tried to cancel that protest, but still people start gathering at about 11 o'clock. 3,000 protesters, and about you have 100 National Guardsmen carrying military rifles. They're armed
Mhm.
and ready for trouble. They're not there to shoot to kill anybody. They're
Mhm.
just there to keep the peace. Okay, that's
Yeah.
the purpose of the National Guard.
Mhm.
Um, It says historians have never reached consensus as to who exactly organized and participated in the Kent State protests, or how many of them were students at the university or anti war activists from elsewhere. So you have students, college students, and then just other people. Okay, that's kind of not good.
Mhm.
It says, but the protests on May 4th, during which activists spoke out against the presence of the National Guard on campus, as well as the Vietnam War, was initially peaceful. Still, Ohio National Guard General Robert Canterbury ordered the protesters to disperse, with an announcement being made by a Kent State police officer riding in a military jeep across the commons and using a bullhorn to be heard over the crowd. The protesters refused to disperse and began shouting and throwing rocks at the guardsmen.
Hmm.
Um, Ruby, could you read paragraph 16?
Okay, 4 dead in Ohio. General Herbert ordered his men to lock and load their weapons and to fire gas into the crowd. The gunmen then marched across the commons, focusing protesters to move up a nearly hill called uh, Blanket,
Blanket.
Blanket Hill, and then down the other side of the hill toward a football practice field. As the football field was enclosed with fencing. The gunmen were caught among amongst yes
Amongst. Mhm.
amongst the angry mob and were the targets of shooting and threw rocks yet again. Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay. So you have the protesters kind of not chasing, but kind of backing the guardsmen up, 100 guardsmen with guns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the general of the National Guard general tells them to lock and load their weapons, be ready to fire, right?
Uh-huh.
And fire tear gas into the crowd. The guardsmen are backed into a football field that's enclosed in fencing, so they are trapped, right?
Oh, okay.
It says the guardsmen soon retreated back up Blanket Hill. When they reached the top of the hill, witnesses say 28 of them suddenly turned and fired their M1 rifles, some into the air, some directly into the crowd of protesters. Over just a 13-second period, nearly 70 shots were fired in total. In all, 4 Kent State students, Jeffrey Miller, Allison Krauss, William Schroeder, and Sandra Schuer, were killed and 9 others were injured. Schroeder was shot in the back, as were 2 of the injured, Robert Stamps and Dean Collar. Okay.
Hmm.
And this is the famous picture from Kent State.
Ah.
Okay. This is a, you know, what's as we see in the news sometimes now, and certainly this story, what is the significance of saying somebody was shot in the back? Why is that an important detail?
Hmm. Him or her doesn't know the enemy come from behind. Yes, no.
Yeah. Generally,
Mm-hmm.
that means it means you're not facing. If
Yes.
it means that the National Guardsman was behind him.
Uh-huh.
Possibly he was the student was running away, leaving the situation, and a policeman or a National Guardsman should be trained. If somebody's running away from you, they are no longer a direct threat, so you don't have to shoot them. So today we see in the news when somebody says somebody was shot in the back, or here a student was shot in the back, that's generally a bad sign,
Uh-huh.
right? A good policeman doesn't shoot somebody in the back because, yeah,
Right.
they may have broken the law, but you only shoot if somebody's endangering your life, and if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's running away from me, they're not endangering my life.
Right.
Okay. Um, okay. So it was, yeah, Ruby, you used the word chaos. So it was just chaos,
Mm-hmm.
and historians debate whether or not the guardsmen were told to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and there's different theories on that. When I pulled this article together in the past, did a bunch of reading, and some people say, well, the general told them to ready, aim, fire, and other people say, well, they weren't told to, they were just acting out of fear.
Mm.
And you can understand the fear. If you're a soldier and you're trapped and there's 3,000 protesters and they look angry and they're
Mhm.
throwing rocks at you. I can understand being afraid.
Mhm.
Um, so it says, following the shooting, the university was immediately ordered closed. Makes sense. And the campus remained shut down for some 6 weeks following the shootings. So,
Mhm.
this is in May and the college is closed.
Right.
Numerous investigatory commissions and court trials followed, during which members of the Ohio National Guard testified that they felt the need to discharge their weapons because they feared for their lives. However, disagreements remain as to whether they were, in fact, under sufficient threat to use force. In a
Mm.
civil suit filed by the injured Kent State students and their families, a settlement was reached in 1979, 9 years later, in which the Ohio National Guard agreed to pay those injured in the events of May 4th, 1970, a total of $675,000.
Mm.
Indeed, the Kent State shootings remain symbolic of the division in public opinion about war in general and the Vietnam War specifically. Many believe it permanently changed the protest movement across the American political spectrum, fostering a sense of disillusionment regarding what exactly these demonstrations accomplish, as well as fears over the potential for confrontation between protesters and law enforcement.
Mm.
So it served as kind of a wake up call moment, um, that, President Nixon at the time,
Mhm.
and although the Vietnam War would go on for some time later, um, it was a wake up call that, hey, the American people really are against this war, and we should really think twice about what we're doing over in Vietnam. Also, it was a wake up call for protesters. If you're going to go protest the Vietnam War, you might get shot, right? Is
Mhm.
kind of the message that people took away from this. So the Kent State shooting, 1970, um, it it was a pretty big moment.
You know this?
It was a very big moment at the time. Big news.
Mm.
Um,
Okay.
but in the story of the Cold War, in the story of the Vietnam War, in the story of American protests,
Mhm.
it's a very important moment and an important story to know about. Okay. So, any questions or comments about how this connects to what we've seen in the past year?
It was it was my scary at that time, huh?
Yeah, it must have been very scary. I mean, especially if you're a college student,
Right.
19 years old, 20 years
Right.
old,
Mhm.
and you think you're just protesting the war,
Right.
and then, the kid next to you is shot in the back.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
must have been very scary.
Oh yeah. And big chaos, huge.
Hmm. Yeah, it was definitely chaotic, and
Right.
the
Right.
the whole time, the Vietnam War, the war itself, the way we were fighting was very chaotic. It was very
Mm.
confusing. It seemed like we were winning, and then was all of a sudden we weren't winning, and
Mhm.
um, it was a complex time, and the
Mhm.
average American was against us fighting in
Mhm.
Vietnam, and yet we still stayed there, and we stayed there, and we stayed there, and so the American people were getting frustrated and sick of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to know. Thank you. It was
Yeah.
good.
Good. Any other questions about it?
I learned something today.
Good.
Mhm.
All right. Jendaya Olowokimi, do you have any questions?
No
I think we're
questions
good.
from my hand.
Okay. All right. Well, good then. I will send this out. I would encourage you to take another look at it. If there's all kinds of YouTube videos about it as well.
Uh-huh.
News videos from the time. There's short videos. There's long videos. YouTube has a lot of information out there. So if you're interested in seeing a little bit more, maybe seeing what these protests look like, seeing the burning of that ROTC building,
Uh-huh.
you know, just search for it on YouTube, and there's some interesting
Okay.
things out there.
Mhm.
So I'll share this. Next week we'll talk about something totally different.
Okay.
But as you do your reading or studying, if you come across anything you want to discuss or have any questions about, just let me know.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, great. Thanks for logging in, guys. Have a great day and a great weekend.
You have a
And
great
you have a
afternoon.
blessed weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah. Stay safe.
Yeah. Go sledding in the snow. Build a snowman.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right.
We'll see
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.